Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for EMBCA's annual OXI Day, October 28th, 1940, commemoration, with this one entitled Freedom's Shout to Tyranny, OXI. My name is Lou Katsos, EMBCA's president, and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. Our distinguished panel includes Lieutenant General, retired Ilias Leontaris, Emeritus Commander of the 1st Hellenic Army and former Chief of the Cypriot National Guard, and Management Consultant at Ratio Legal Services. Professor Stephen Bowman, Emeritus Judaic Studies Department at the University of Cincinnati. Dr. Christopher Lamb, author and scholar, author, writer, historian, and EMBCA Director Alexander Billinis, and historian, researcher, author, and EMBCA Director Peter Giakoumis. The program today will include a musical presentation by well-known Hellenic American opera singer, bass baritone Costas Tsourakis, singing a cappella Sofia Vembo songs of the period. OXI Day, which took place on October 28, 1940, is a national Hellenic holiday and represents when the Hellenic Prime Minister Metaxas was awoken to respond to a series of demands from a representative of Italy, a World War II Axis power, which would have allowed foreign troops free rein in Greece, a neutral nation at the time. His response to those demands and the Hellenic people's simple shout, OXI, no, which appeared as headlines in the Hellenic papers the next day, led to battles by the Hellenes of historic international consequences, not only for Hellas, but also for Europe and the total free world. It was the first time in the European theater that an Axis power was defeated after them taking over country after country. It raised the hopes of occupied Europe and caused the Nazi forces, which were scheduled to attack the Soviet Union under Operation Barbarossa, to divert their forces and invade Greece instead. This diversion led to a delay in the Nazi invasion of the USSR and eventually to the Nazi defeat there in the Soviet winter. As per the title of this event, OXI Day and OXI, Freedom's Shout to Tyranny, was a turning point in World War II and had an importance that went beyond the Hellenic Republic and a war international in scope. In addition, despite the ultimate Hellenic defeat, having fought long and hard, the bravery of the Hellenic people during these difficult 6 months also had the effect of changing how Hellenic Americans were perceived in America and Hellenes internationally in general. In America, it transformed Hellenic Americans from being thought of as the other to being finally accepted as Americans. Hellenic official history of the Helleno-Italian War divides it into 3 periods. The Italian offensive and its defeat from October 28th to November 13th, 1940. Second, the Hellenic counteroffensive from November 14th to January the 6th of 1941. And third, the gradual stabilization of the front from January 6th until the onset of the German attack on April the 6th and referred to as the Battle of Greece. The preludes to the war were many, which included interwar strained relations and Italy's support of Kemal's Turkish forces during the period of 1919-1922. During the late 1920s and early 1930s, it related to Mussolini's attempt diplomatically to create a, quote, an Italian-dominated Balkan bloc that would link Turkey, Greece, Bulgaria, and Hungary, end quote. It related to Italian imperialism, to a hostile press campaign in Italy against Hellas, accused at the time of being a British ally, and we can go on. With the Italian annexation of Albania, relations between Italy and Hellas deteriorated rapidly, and a number of provocations, including a fascist targeting of Hellenic merchant marine ships in the Atlantic, and culminating, among others, in the sinking of the Greek light cruiser Eli by the Italians on August the 15th. Before we start our panel discussion, I would like to introduce Hellenic opera singer Costas Tsourakis, who will sing a cappella a couple of famous Sofia Vembo songs of the period, one before and one after our discussion. Costas Tsourakis is an award-winning baritone and conductor and a native of Astoria in New York. His opera credits include the title role of Mozart's Don Giovanni, performed in Germany and throughout the United States. He has performed at the musical festival in Switzerland and concerts in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem with the Israeli Philharmonic. As a conductor, credits include Handel's Messiah, Mozart's Requiem, and the Centennial Concert from Byzantium to America at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. In addition to his passion for performing, he is a dedicated music educator who regularly teaches young musicians and a proud member of Maya Hepa Chapter Delphi, Chapter 25. He is the director of the renowned Archdiocesan Cathedral Choir and youth choirs of the Archdiocesan Cathedral of the Holy Trinity, and the artistic director of the Great Music Under the Byzantine Dome concert series. Costas Tsourakis.
Μες στους δρόμους τριγυρνάνε οι μανάδες και κοιτάνε να αντικρίσουνε. Τα παιδιά τους πορκιστήκαν, στο σταθμό όταν χωριστήκαν να νικήσουνε. Μα για εκείνους που έχουν φύγει και η δόξα τους τη λίγη, ας χαιρόμαστε. Και ποτέ καμιάς μη κλάψει, κάθε πόνο της ας κάψει, κι ας ευχόμαστε. Παιδιά της Ελλάδος, παιδιά, που σκληρά πολεμάτε πάνω στα βουνά. Παιδιά, στη γλυκιά Παναγιά, προσευχόμαστε όλες να έρθετε ξανά. Λέω σε όσες αγαπούνε και για κάποιον ξενυχτούνε και στενάζουνε, πως η πίκρα και η τρεμούλα σε μια τίμια Ελληνοπούλα δεν ταιριάζουνε. Ελληνίδες του Ζαλόγου και της πόλης και του λόγου και πλακιώτισσες, όσο κι αν πικρά πονούμε, υπερήφανα ασκούμε σαν σουλιώτισσες. Παιδιά της Ελλάδος, παιδιά, που σκληρά πολεμάτε πάνω στα βουνά. Παιδιά, στη γλυκιά Παναγιά, προσευχόμαστε όλες να έρθετε ξανά. Με της νίκης τα κλαδιά σας προσμένουμε, παιδιά.
Thank you, Costa. That was terrific. Before we start our open panel discussion, we're going to have individual panelist presentations. We're going to start with Lieutenant General retired Ilias Leontaris, who is the Emeritus Commander, as we indicated, of the First Hellenic Army and former Chief of the Cypriot National Guard and Management Consultant in the Ratio Legal Services. He entered the Hellenic Military Academy in 1977 and graduated in 1981 with the rank of second lieutenant in the infantry. He is a Supreme War College graduate and Defense Department graduate, and attended the Greek Army Military Police Officers School, the Joint School of Electronic Warfare and Strategic Intelligence course in Greece. He also trained in the U.S. Army Military Police and trained in the trainers schools at Fort McClellan in Alabama in the USA, as well as attending coursework at the NATO school in Oberammergau. He completed his 43-year career with his service as Chief of the National Guard General Staff of Cyprus from 2017 to 2020. He was a commanding officer and the staff. He has held commanding officer and staff positions and entrusted by the Greek Armed Forces leadership, and participated in various international conferences, including with NATO, the EU, and others, in bilateral contacts with many nations, and had the opportunity to deal with and gain experience relating to multiple military issues. General Ilias Leontaris has been honored with all the distinctions provided by the Hellenic state for his rank and service in the armed forces, as well as with NATO medals for his services. The general has been awarded the Medal of the Chief of the Army of the Republic of Cyprus, the Legion of Merit of the USA, the Armenian Armed Forces, the Italian Armed Forces, the AHEPA Military Honor, the Knight Officer, the World Organization of Military Sports, the Lion of St. Mark of the Patriarchate of Alexandria, Aios Epiphanos of the Metropolis of Constanza and Famagusta, Cyprus. He holds a certificate in strategic and diplomatic studies and is a certified CFE treaty inspector. Thank you for joining us today, General Leontaris.
So, dear Mr. Katsos, President of EMBCA, dear professors, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. First of all, let me thank Lou for taking his time to introduce myself and to read all this stuff that that I have done in my life. Anyway, it was an honor, and I accepted with pleasure your invitation to participate in this very distinguished panel, and to contribute to what extent my knowledge and experience, let's say, I took during this 43-year service in the armed forces in Greece and abroad. I will use some PowerPoint presentation just to cover, let's say, the time, and I will try to be as short as I can in order to catch the time. As you understand, it is not enough the time of an event like this to cover an event like the World War II, and especially an event World War II when it includes the epic OXI Day that the Greeks, let's say, announced to the Italian ambassador on October 28, 1940. But I will try to cover some of the most important and significant points, going from the period before the war, during the war, and after the war, as we say. And let me start with what happened in Europe, the period before the war. What was the Europe? We are in Germany, and Germany with Hitler in power. Since 1933, Germany tries to get rid of the defeat and the consequences of the Treaty of Versailles, with which the World War I ended. In other words, Hitler tries to establish the Great Germany and to provide her with the strategic depth, as we say today, which considers necessary for Germany's development. Depth which considers necessary for the development, it includes the strategic areas, almost the whole Europe, I would say, and that includes the United Kingdom, Romania oil wells, the Black Sea, and the Russian plains as well, what is today Ukraine and furthermore to the east. And that brings us to 1938, when Germany voluntarily annexed Austria. So in UK, in United Kingdom, Arthur Chamberlain is the Prime Minister from 1937 to 1940, and he follows the foreign policy of Stanley Baldwin, which went down in history as the appeasement policy, what we call in Greece, ψυχραιμία και κατευνασμός. United Kingdom with Italy and France signed with Germany the Munich Agreement in 1938. And historical has remained the phrase with which he announced the signing of this Munich Agreement, peace for our time. Is it okay with the presentation?
Fantastic. Please continue, please.
Okay. All these efforts that Chamberlain did went with no purpose. Were tragically refused when Germany violated the agreement and invaded Prague and Czechoslovakia at the time in order to capture the Sudetenland, which is the west part of the Czechia today, and annexed all the whole Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain then changed his policy and signed Karadi agreements with Poland, Greece, and Turkey and Romania in the event of a German attack in spring 1939. On September 3, 1939, 2 days after the German invasion to Poland, the Chamberlain government was forced to declare war on Germany, so World War II had begun. After Germany's invasion of Norway and the failure of British troops to confront German troops, he was heavily criticized, even by members of his party who called for his resignation. When Germany invaded both Netherlands, Belgium, and France, Chamberlain was forced to resign on May 10, 1940. Winston Churchill took over as Prime Minister, although Chamberlain remained in his government as a member. Over the next 12 months, German mobbers would hammer the country, I mean United Kingdom, increasingly killing 45,000 Britons and destroying 2 million homes. It is worthy to remind you here, now I'm going to Italy, that Italy had invaded Ethiopia on October 1935. On November 1st, 1936, the Rome-Berlin axis was established. And on November 25, 1936, Germany and Japan signed the pact against the Communist International. Back to Italy, Italy invades and occupies Albania from 7 to 15 April 1939, whose security was guaranteed by Britain and France. In addition, Germany signs with Russia the pact for the non-aggression and sharing of Eastern Europe on August 23, 1939. That lasted only 2 years. After this short reference to the situation in Europe, let's see what was going in Greece. Greece is already more or less 4 years after the August 4th regime, and tries to get rid of the consequences of the Lausanne Treaty and to get stability in politics and economic development with the reconstruction of the country and the rehabilitation of refugees. In other words, it is trying to recover from the Asia Minor campaign and catastrophe, and we memorize today. I cannot say celebrate. We memorize this year the 100 years since that event. In addition to that, tries to sign bilateral and multilateral agreements with Romania, Italy before, Yugoslavia, Albania, and with Turkey as well. You remember the famous visit of Venizelos to Ankara and the signing of the Treaty of Friendship, and also the Pact of Cordial Understanding, and according to supplemented by additional treaty that was extended until 1948. However, although that happened, it was obvious that the defense field had been left behind. It was so much need for other purposes, and there was no money, if you like, in order to support the army, an army that was coming out of more or less 11 years war since the Balkan wars, and then World War I, and then the campaign to Crimea in Ukraine, and then to Asia Minor. And of course, all these turbulences that took place in the country with the separation of Venizelos and the king, and what happened after 1922. But this is another issue. So, coming now to the 4th of August regime and Metaxas government foreign policy. Many people believed that because of his training in Germany and his commitment to the German-oriented King Constantinos and his belief in the military supremacy of Germany, many people believed that he is going to join the Axis. But Metaxas, according to the historical events, had made his decision much earlier. And he did that in 1934, when he was, let's say, in the council of the chiefs of the political parties, and they were discussing the Balkan Pact. He declared that Greece may lay as a political doctrine that in no case can it be found in a camp contrary to that in which England would be located. We can regard this as a dogma. I support and embrace it. And then I repeat it again in April 22, 1936, a few months earlier than he took over the country. In summer of 1936, where Metaxas established the dictatorship of the 4th of August, supported somehow with King George II, the radical changes in the correlation of forces in Europe had already begun. What gave the ignition, let's say, in order to start the defense reorganization in Greece was the Italian expansion to Africa and let's say the plans for Albania. And this asked, if you like, the government to spend some more money, and Metaxas started to prepare the country as soon as he took over. Despite his ideological origins and the country's economic dependence on Germany, Metaxas, faithfully to the doctrine of pro-British solidarity imposed on him by his geopolitics and military view and his personal interest, turns to Britain, as I said, the greatest naval power, the long-time friend and ally country for help. He made the proposal in order to conclude an alliance, but the British government answered negative. They did not like to come into any contradiction with the Axis power at this time. And the next day, Metaxas emphatically, although the British did not support him, Metaxas declared that the country will stay neutral. And some time later, he said that we will stay neutral as long as the UK government wants us to stay neutral. When the Italian troops invaded Albania in April 1939, and the threat to Greece was evident, UK, Britain, and France, after repeated pressure from the Greek government, guaranteed the independence of Greece. which declared itself determined to fight to the bitter end in case of violation of his sovereign rights. Although these guarantees were essentially symbolic without specific commitments to provide military assistance in the event of an Italian attack, Greek foreign policy remained within the framework of the policy of neutrality, which was essentially derived of the will of the United Kingdom government. However, the entry of the Italian troops into Tirana, Italy begins the psychological operations against Greece, or a kind of hybrid war, as we call it today. On July 30, 1940, the Italy Minister of Foreign Affairs accused Greece that Greece allows British ships to get docked in Greek ports and has broken the neutrality. The provocation of fascist Italy subsequently became more frequent. Italian aircraft started violating the Greek airspace almost daily. Italy's exit to war in the summer of 1940 and the collapse of France finds Greece committed to the policy of strict neutrality again, as I said before, a policy that does not, however, prevent Italy's repeated threatening demands about the Greek borders anyway. And with that, we arrived to August 15, when an Italian submarine torpedoing the cruiser Eli on August 15 during the celebration of the dormition of the Theotokos in the port of Tinos. After this hostile and tragic event, Greece, although it maintained a neutral stance, inevitably would very quickly enter the process of warfare. Back in Rome, the plans were ready, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs had already prepared the ultimatum since October 22nd, and it was entrusted to the ambassador of Italy to Greece. While it happened in Europe, Metaxas, with a series of initiatives, the military and political economic fields, and with the statements such as, in whatever action Greece takes, these are always in the concept, with the concept of the Britain, and often its own request. Although in 1936, the military equipment of the country consisted of material like in the left side, as you see the slide. After 4 years, material of the Asian major campaign, 4 years later, Greece lined up for its defense a strong army of 500,000 men. From 1936 to 1940, Metaxas made particularly significant efforts to equip the armed forces, although orders were placed on time, not all the material were delivered. The manufacturing companies, in order to safeguard the interest of their governments, refused to conduct the deliveries of war materials or were artfully delayed when the clouds of the upcoming New World War began to appear. Allow me at this point to open a parenthesis and refer to the fortification of the northern borders. As it is known as Metaxas Line, Metaxas, as a captain in 1912 and in the World War I, had realized the need to fortify the northern borders, because as you know very well, it was always in place the interest of Bulgaria in order to reach the GMC, and Metaxas was seeing the threat coming from the north, so he had always been in his mind, and he was waiting for the opportunity, if you like, in order to fortify the borders. He started with this Metaxas line, which consists of 21 fortresses, and I invite you to come to the area of Ceres and to join you and to visit some of them, which are open to public, and to see what the Greeks did in 1936 with the machines and the engineering that was available at the time. It was a miracle, I can say. This one leads me to the time of the 28th of October, 28th of October, yes. And just to repeat that the time between August 15 and October 28, it was the calm before the storm. And Metaxas used that time in order to mobilize the country, and he was forwarding forces to the borders of Epirus and Pindos and Western Macedonia. At the time, there was no any obvious threat in the other front. I mean, the Central Macedonia, where the Germans came in, and I will refer to them later. So all the forces were oriented to Pindos and to Epirus and Western Macedonia. So 28th of October, as Lou said before, the ambassador handed in the ultimatum to Metaxas. He, let's say, in the voice of the Greek people, answered the famous no, and that means that we are in war. That was the beginning of the operations in the borders, and this operation with the Italian operation, let's say, started 5:30 in the morning, and can be divided in 3 periods, as Lou said before. Before go to that, I would like to make use of what our singer said. This is how the mothers were, let's say, saluted the sons before leave from the train station to go to war. And these are the mothers who were waiting them to come back. So back to the operations, 3 periods from October 28 to November 13, and then November 13 to January 6, and then the 3rd period, which is famous with the spring offense anyway. The Italian forces attacked the Epirus and Pindos, as I said, which is in the left side, and took more defensive stance in the northwestern Macedonia. In Epirus, the 8th Division effectively repelled the attacks of the Italian army. In Pindos, however, due to the superiority of the enemy, the Greek forces were forced to retreat, as a result of which the Italians penetrated to a great depth. However, the rapid concentration of forces near Pindos, the penetration stopped at the site, the famous Battle of Ilias Leontaris, was secured from the northeast, and in combination with the successful defense in Epirus, the Greek forces now undertook offensive actions to eliminate the Italian enclave. The Italian plan of operations had already failed in that area. The Italian infiltration of Pindos, although initially successful, was not supported by other forces and was eventually cut off. On all fronts, the Italian army turned into defense. Enemy air force did not bring the desired results, since it was uncoordinated with the Italian ground forces, which could not take advantage of the aerial bombardments. Italian artillery and battle tanks also did not coordinate and failed to support the infantry movement. Despite the difficulties of the first days, the initiative of the war operation passed to the Greek forces, which, after a general attack in November, began to liberate cities with a Greek population started with Koritsa. During the second and third period of the Greek-Italian war, from November 14 to March 26, the Greek army carried out counterattack to fully restore the integrity of the national territory. During the operation of the second period, the Italian forces in the Albanian theater of operation amounted 15 infantry divisions and 1 tank division against 11 infantry divisions, 1 infantry brigade, and 1 cavalry division of the Greek side. So it was more than the Greeks. In addition, the overwhelming numerical superiority of the Italian, there was no air force, and the lack of tanks in the Greek army must be considered as well. Nevertheless, the offensive operation of the Greek forces were crowned with the success, but were not exploited. although opportunities were presented which could yield significant results due to the fact that the Greek army did not have armored and fast-moving wings. Thus, due to this weakness, the Greek forces were forced to avoid the lowland zones and move mainly through mountainous directions, resulting in the elongation of the phalanges, the increase of the fatigue of men and animals, as well as the creation of problems in the supply. The most important event of the third period of the war was the spring attack, as it was called, the attack of the Italian army. The supreme Italian leadership, after the stabilization and the substantial cessation of operation due to the harsh weather, sought to deal serious blow against the Greeks in order to appease itself and its allies Germans, because Germany had started considering about the progress of the operations, the Italian operations in Albania, and Hitler thought that the Italians would succeed to occupy Greece and he had planned, as Lou said, to invade Russia with the Operation Barbarossa earlier enough, but it did not happen. So that was the Italian offense, and the supreme Italian leadership, to include Mussolini, after the stabilization, started the preparation for this big, let's say, big offensive operation. Mussolini, knowing that the Germans were preparing to intervene in Greece, because Germans saw that the results of the Italian results were not well enough, but ignoring the time when this action would take place, was possessed by the anxiety that his ally might catch up with him and thus find Italy in a particular humiliating position to owe it to the German to rid itself and of the impasse in which it had fallen due to its miserable failure of the Albanian front. On the morning of March 19, the expected Italian attack was launched, but to make it short, Mussolini, disappointed of the progress of the operation, and departed Tirana on March 21 for Italy, planning to repeat the attack at the end of the month. However, the accession of Yugoslavia to the Allies, to the Axis, at the beginning to the Allies, in the meantime, did not allow the new attempt to be carried out. Later on, as you know, the Yugoslavia changed position because the government was changed in Yugoslavia, and after that, the German operation Marita was launched against Greece, and they used two axes of approaches, we say in the military way. The first one was through the fortresses of Rum, and the second one through the valley of Axios River, and they bypassed all the fortresses through this valley because Yugoslavia somehow opened the doors, and this led to the occupation of Greece. However, it has already delayed the operation because it was not enough just to break the borders, because it had to occupy the whole Greece, and of course to continue with the battle in Creta with the Operation Mercury. That was the first airborne operation in World War II, and of course in the modern history. This, as I said before, caused a big delay for the Operation Barbarossa, and it is famous that Hitler said that if the Italian operation went well in Albania, there will be no need for Germans to attack Greece, and will not be necessary to have the delay, and there would be, let's say, easier to seize Moscow and Leningrad, and they would not need for the Battle of Stalingrad. So this one leads me to go back again and to provide you some numbers with the resistance time in days in World War II, and starting with Greece and going back down to Denmark. Sorry, to Denmark. You see who made, let's say, the World War II. Continuing and coming closer to my end, we have to underline the participation of Greek Cypriots to World War II. There was the Cypriot regiment, which participated with the British forces, but there were also Greek Cypriot individuals who joined the Greek armed forces. They were students in Greece or Greek Cypriots who found themselves in Greece and joined the Greek armed forces. After the occupation of Greece, as you referred before, the resistance started. Of course, the government left to Middle East and then to Egypt and later on to London. The resistance started with all the let's say, the population of Greece. But I would like here to underline the importance of the Greek Americans' participation in the resistance. I'm sure that you are aware of this story and the famous 122 Battalion and the history that they made. And you see in that picture here is it is the only time that the United States flank paraded in the same line with another flank. And that goes by an executive order that was signed by Roosevelt. And I have some books of these like this in Greek, of course, and I can provide you some. But anyway, this is it's an unknown story to many people, and how these Greeks, second generation in the United States, left the luxury of their, let's say, houses and came to Greece in order to resist to the German occupation. In October 1944, the flank of Germany was downloaded in Acropolis, and what remained after this is how the let's say foreigners, the leaders of big countries saw. This is what I said before, how Hitler responded to the Italian failure. Here what Charles de Gaulle said. Churchill. And of course, the famous one that from now on, the heroes fight like Greeks. And of course, the Russian, the Moscow radio station, sorry, thanked the Greek people for the participation in the war. So coming to the end, I would like to underline this one, that the unity of the population of Greece, together with the good management of the preparation, as it concerns the equipment and the in-time mobilization of the population and the forward of the forces to the borders, were the main, together with the tactics, especially the tactics of General Katsimitros, who was the commander of the 8th Division, gave this, let's say, victory to the Greek forces in Epirus and Pindos. And when we go to, let's say, to the German invasion, it was not so easy in 1941 for the Greek armed forces to move the forces from Epirus to Macedonia. There were no trucks, no trains, no buses, no planes, no roads, no railways in order to make the movement of these forces from one front to another front. So that caused the, let's say, the occupation of Greece. And what followed was the, let's say, the triple occupation with Italy until the time that was still in the Axis, was in the Epirus areas and some Ionian islands. The Bulgarians who left the Germans to cross the country occupied some areas between Strimonas River up to Nestos River, and of course Germany, the rest of the country. So that was as short as I could done it. Thank you very much again, and it will be my pleasure to answer any other question or to participate in a discussion if it follows.
Ilya, thank you so much for that, and we'll come back to questions at the end when we have the full panel. Many listeners, in particular this generation, don't comprehend what it meant for Europe and the free world while the Hellenic army was holding back the fascist forces. It was an unbelievable time period, and again, it raised the hopes of all the people who were enslaved by the fascists in Europe. And it was an extremely international event and a very famous event. I will say, Ilya, that the 122nd Battalion that was formed by Roosevelt, was actually, it was called the 122nd Battalion because it was the 122nd year after the Hellenic Revolution of Independence. In other words, of 1821. Yeah. And for those who may not know, but certainly the AHEPA members know that one of the people in command of these various battalions was the president of AHEPA, and he had actually went to the Sons of Pericles in that particular time and brought him into the armed forces. And obviously it's a separate discussion, but they certainly went into occupied Greece and did a lot of damage to the fascist forces. And certainly something that we should talk about in the future. Thank you.
If I can come back for 2 minutes. In fact, the first commander of this battalion was Peter Giakoumis, who was the first Greek American who graduated at the West Point. Peter Giakoumis, yes, and where Roosevelt went to inspect them before leaving. But anyway, the British government did not allow the battalion to deploy to Greece, and then they split it in battle groups and operated under the OSS agency anyway. But it's a good story, and there are many books.
Absolutely, and I think that story should be told, and I think we'll do it in the future. And we'll absolutely have a whole discussion on that.
Okay.
Because forget about the United States; many people don't know, but even in Alas, they have no clue as to what happened.
Yeah. Okay. We
will discuss
it another time, not to take the time of the other speakers.
Okay. Our next presenter will be Professor Stephen Bowman. Professor Bowman is an American scholar and academic, particularly known for his research of Hellenic and Jewish relations through the past 3 millennia, with emphasis on Byzantine and Holocaust periods. He is a professor emeritus of Judaic studies at the University of Cincinnati, where he teaches a wide range of courses in ancient and medieval Judaic studies and modern Israel. He received his BA in history from the University of Massachusetts and completed his PhD dissertation at Ohio State University on Byzantine Jewry during the Paleologo period. He has been the editor-in-chief of the Sephardi and Greek Holocaust Library that has published several Greek Holocaust memoirs and has edited many other books. Professor Bowman has been a visiting professor at NYU, the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, a visiting lecturer at Haifa University and the University of California, La Jolla, and a visiting professor of Wolfson College, Cambridge University, to work on fragments of Sefer Yoshipon. He has authored 80 refereed journal articles and book chapters, and besides editing numerous books, has written 6 books, including The Jews of Byzantium, 1204 to 1453, The Holocaust in Salonika, Eyewitness Accounts, Jewish Resistance in Wartime Greece, The Agony of the Greek Jews, 1940 to 1945, which was described by Catherine Fleming, one of our friends, as one which, quote, produced a careful and multi-layered examination of Greek Jewry, most devastating 5 years. Was characterized by Nikos Tsafriris as, quote, the most complete chronicle to date of the Holocaust of Greek Jewry, end quote, and by Aristotle Callis as a fascinating book, including a complex set of stories relating to individuals, families, and entire communities. He also wrote an annotated translation of the Sefer Yosipan. My apology for not pronouncing it correctly. Thank you for joining us, Professor Bowman. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the invitation and to share this time with some distinguished colleagues, and to General Leontaris for the macro view of World War II. And what I'd like to do is cycle down to Ypres and the war against the Italians. Now, I was taught in an article some years ago that all Greek heroes are dead. And that's when you visit Greek temples, you find a heroion with the body of some particular hero in it. And the hero that I'd like to speak about today is the one that really hasn't had much reportage other than the war period itself, and perhaps a little bit later in the last 20 years as such. We're talking about the career of Lieutenant Colonel Mordechai Friezes, who may be known to some of the audience. He had been in the Greek army since World War I, participated in the Anatolian campaign, and fought through various other other periods in the 1920s and 1930s. As such, he finally reached the rank of lieutenant colonel, and he asked to be assigned to Yanina, to the Ypres defense, where he, given the Italian threats, possibilities of invasion, he worked out a plan to defend Ypres against such an attack. He submitted it to General Papagos, who authorized it, and thus he began the preparations for the Italian campaign. When the invasion began on October 28th, turns out that OXI, the famous OXI statement that was given, I think, somewhere later than the 4 o'clock or 4 a.m. awakening. By then, the Italian troops had already crossed the border. So the Greek forces which were there, I think that Tsourakis had called up some 300,000 Greeks. Some of them were overcome and began retreating back towards the defensive line. Whereupon Friezes initiated his plan for defense, and that held out for 17 days, which stopped the Italian advance, whereupon he then launched the counterattack, which over the next 2 months brought the Greek army into control of perhaps a quarter to a third of Albania, whereupon the war settled down for the next couple of months before the Germans came in and invaded through Yugoslavia, which was split amongst several contending parties, which allowed for the country basically to collapse. Now, what I'd like to do is to read a small section from Michael Matsas's classic book, The Illusion of Safety, in which he rehearses not only the Holocaust in Greece, but the resistance and the participation of the Greek Jews in the war, which is relatively unknown, especially to the Greeks, and more so to Western scholars who have ignored that particular period, and to the Greeks themselves, which in effect ignored some of this material. So Matsas included in his book, The Illusion of Safety, his own memoir of that particular period. And he recalls that day. On October 28th, 1940, I went to school as usual. The classes were assembled in the yard, a student recited the prayer, and the choir sang a hymn. At this point, the principal, Mr. Pantazis, used to make some eloquent remarks before each teacher marched his class into the building. On this morning, he announced that the war had started. The school would become a hospital, and we would not have classes until arrangements were made to transform the school into a tobacco warehouse. He sounded sad, but his 1,000 students were delirious with joy and patriotic enthusiasm. We went down the main street yelling rhythmically, "We will win." It did not take long before the ambulances started arriving filled with wounded soldiers. At night, we were sleeping with our clothes on, ready to run to the air raid shelters at a moment's notice. The newspapers kept informing us of a strategic retreat until the day the Greek army stopped the enemy advance and pushed the Italian troops back. It was rumored that Enas Ithreas, colonel, stopped them. Eventually, we learned that the rumor started as Enas Evreus, that is, a Jewish colonel. But it became Hithrenos colonel, a colonel from the island of Idra, because nobody could believe that the gallant officer Mordechai Frisis was a Jew. He then goes on to emphasize Frisis' victory, because what it did is it stopped the Italians. The Greek army regained its confidence and enthusiasm and chased the Italians deep into Albania, occupying a third of the country and remaining there until April 1941. Colonel Frisis led valiantly and courageously, but was later killed in battle on December 5th, 1940. Actually, it was an Italian airplane that strafed the area, and he was riding his horse, leading his men against the Italians, and in fact, he was killed along with several Jews from Larissa who were his guards. Now, in any event, what Friesi had done by implementing his plan to expel the enemy, which he had developed prior to the war, and which had previously approved by the Greek Chief of Staff, General Papagos, Friesi and his troop prevented the Italian Julia division from encircling the 8th Greek division and stopped the retreat of the Greek army. And he counterattacked and liberated the Greek city of Konitsa and entered the Italian-occupied Albania. And this was the first Allied victory of the Second World War. This at the time when Britain was undergoing the Blitz, and they needed something to cheer up on. And of course, the British were in the process of defeating the Italians in North Africa, and the British Air Force destroyed half of the Italian fleet at Bari. So in effect, what we're doing is really turning things around. But the victory of Greece over the Italians was a major shot in the arm to the Allies, who in effect were rather despondent, if you will, at that particular time. Now, when Friezes was killed, Prime Minister Metaxas and the heads of the armed forces sent their deepest condolences to the Friezes family and honored him for his bravery. In addition, busts of Friezes were in the War Museum, were placed in the War Museum of Kalpaki and in Chalkis, the town where he was born. But in effect, shortly after the war, he kind of disappeared from the story. And his son spent the next 60 years trying to get him recognized again officially. And in 2002, the Greeks recovered his body in Albania, and in a major ceremony, interred it in the Jewish cemetery in Thessaloniki, which was the new cemetery that was replaced after the Germans confiscated the oldest cemetery on the eastern side of Thessaloniki and allowed it to be totally destroyed. And today, that cemetery area is now the home of the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. In any event, in 2002, when it was returned, a statue was placed in Chalkis, of which I have a picture. I don't know if it can be seen. If it can be seen, if I can find it again. No. Oh well, you lose it. And anyways, it's a statue of a horse, a rampart horse, which is very rare in military statues, with the horse rearing and with Frieze on top with a sword in his right hand, charging against the enemy, and with a plaque acknowledging his work. And a statue, a bust of him also was placed on the row of statues or busts in Chalkis that honors people from the wartime period. So in effect, because of Frieze's, who was raised to the posthumously to the rank of colonel, his counterattack and Greece's occupation of 1/3 of Albania, Germany spent another 2 months to conquer Greece, thus delaying the attack on Russia and putting Russia at a military disadvantage, at a military advantage compared to them. So in effect, if we look at the total picture of the war in the East Mediterranean, then we see the Italians being defeated in Albania, losing their much of their fleet, being defeated in North Africa, and being restricted to building roads throughout Ethiopia as they bombed the natives there for their own pleasure. And Germany waited then for 2 months, which was recognized by the German staff, at least after the war, that this in effect kept them from defeating the Russians and taking Moscow, which may have knocked Moscow out of Russia out of the war, but it did not, and the Russian counterattack eventually succeeded with the counterattack by the Siberian troops, which were brought there, in helping to end World War II. So in effect, that's the story of Friezes and of his son, who worked hard to get his father recognized. It is interesting that Matzes, who lived in Agrinion at the time as a young man, I think he was still I think 14 or 15, too young to be in the war. But his father was a assistant bank manager in Agrinion, and he hosted Mrs. Freeses and her children in his own home, as well as other Greek Jews who were escaping from first the Italians and then the Germans. The one interesting point is that when the Italians called upon the Jews in the area to register, which was a first stage of what the Germans would later do in registering all the Jews so that they could arrest them, she showed up with her children to register, and when she announced her name, Freeses, the officer who was taking down people's signatures said, "Are you related to Colonel Freeses?" She says, "Yes, I'm his widow." He stood up and saluted and said, "I fought with, I was subject to Colonel Freeses, who was a magnificent leader and of his men, and one who treated the many Italian soldiers decently when they surrendered." So in effect, Metaxas also honored her and even allowed her son to join the youth movement that he created, which in effect banned Jews from wearing the uniform, but in some areas, some students, some Jewish students were allowed to wear the uniform. So in effect, one of the problems that existed during the period was that many of the Greek officers who were now, I think, royalists, since the officers who had been trained in France were cashiered by Metaxas, they were not too happy with the Jews, nor with the Jews in the army, and treated them accordingly. So at this point, we can move to the development of the resistance in which the Jews participated. About 13,000 Jews participated in the actual fighting against the Italians, and suffered perhaps heavier losses than the non-Jewish Greek soldiers. Once the Germans broke through in the north and chasing the British down all the way to Kalamata, where they embarked to Cyprus, they sent out units, and the Greek general in charge signed the terms of surrender, for which he was eventually imprisoned for betraying Greece. In any event, the Germans sent out patrols to inform the Greeks that the war, at least the war was over, since the government had surrendered. When they reached some of the units in the Pindus, they called on the Greeks to surrender accordingly, but of course nobody knew any German, so they didn't know what the Germans were talking about. There was, however, one individual, Yitzhak Moshe, who later had a distinguished career as Capitan Kitsos in the Vermion region, and he had learned German. He wanted to actually, he wanted to go to Germany and study engineering, but he talked it over with his father, who convinced him that Germans were vicious anti-Semites. So eventually, his German behind him. He went on to a different career, eventually joining the army, but he was not allowed to become an officer because his name was on a watch list, where many of the Jews who had been socialists or even communists were not allowed to become officers. And that practice of hindering Jews from becoming officers remained a policy, either official or unofficial, within the Greek army for a number of decades. And I met people in the early 2000s when I was in Greek who said that they were not allowed to become officers. So Katsos then, when he had to decide what to do, said to himself, I was undecided whether to become a Catholic or a communist. So he eventually decided to become a communist instead, and work with the growing communist movement in distributing leaflets, helping the poor during the hunger famine of 40-41 with food and other things of that nature. And then eventually he was invited to join the Ilias resistance. And he wound up in the area of Vermion, where he became the leader of a small group. Eventually, he became the captain of a company and spent his time in protecting the crops, which they distributed to the local farmers, and in attacking German forces, and in fact had a distinguished career. Actually, at the end, he said he was very proud of the fact that he never lost any men except for one or two occasions. And he asked them actually at the end of his discussion with me, he asked his men, he says, "Why did you always come and follow me?" And they said, "Because we knew you would bring us back alive." And in other words, he did not sacrifice men unnecessarily, as did some of the Greek officers during the war itself, or at least that was his particular contention. But there were a number of Jews who were in the resistance, and in fact, Louis, I sent you a copy of my book on that account.
Yes, very nice. Thank you.
And it's a story that's not known. The first person to really write about this in English was Michael Matzos, whom I mentioned before. He called it the illusion of safety. And after going through British documents and secret American documents, which had been declassified, and the Roosevelt papers and the State Department papers in Hyde Park, he came to the conclusion that the Americans really stood aside and never made any attempt to warn the Jews of Greece to beware, to get out if they could, which is very strange. And aside from the fact that the State Department we know is openly hostile to Jewish immigrants, but why not tell them, especially since in 1942-43, the only really free area in Europe was Greece, albeit occupied, but nonetheless the mountains were free, and there were many areas which were controlled by Ilias and Edes that welcomed Jews, either as refugees or particularly as fighters. And in my own book, I estimate that there were at least 1,000 Jewish fighters, a number of whom who were killed, who had extremely important roles. For example, Jewish doctors who went into the mountains, Jewish nurses who went into the mountains, and Jewish women who were refugees in the mountains, living in villages, who taught women sewing. They brought their Singer sewing machines with them. They taught them sewing. The young girls who went in there taught them songs, if you will, resistance songs. There were a number of capitans, there were a number of capitanistas, which virtually unknown, as some of them. So in effect, this period in which the Jews participated, despite the hostility of some of the Christian members of the resistance, nonetheless, they were proud to be to Greeks, and Matzes claimed that the Jews proved the fact that they were Greeks, neither Jew nor Christian, as Paul said, and as Archbishop Damaskinos said when he worked on their behalf in 1944. So in effect, this story then of this small ethnic group, which by at the beginning of the war was perhaps 75,000 to 80,000, even though some parts of Greece, like Rhodes, were under Italian control, but nonetheless, a very small group. They contributed a number of men to and women to the military. Contributed a number of people to the resistance in various ways, and even the Salonicans who abandoned Greece after the 1932 anti-Semitic riots in Thessaloniki and went to Palestine. A large number of them, volunteered for the British Expeditionary Force that. As part of the group that the British brought to help Greece during 1941, as such. So what I will do is give the time to my colleagues to fill in other aspects of this particular period, and if anybody is interested, I will be happy to answer any questions in the question period.
Thank you, Professor Bowman. We are certainly proud of the Hellenic. Yeah.
Lou,
no, it's okay. Can we do that in our open discussion with each other? Because this way we're never going to finish. We are certainly proud of the Hellenic Jews and their role in what took place, obviously, with OXI Day and subsequent to OXI Day. Certainly with EMBCA, we have more than once discussed our great patriot, Colonel Mordecai Frisis. And may everyone who fought, including him and others, may their memories be eternal always, and may Allah recognize them, throughout history going forward. Our next panelist is going to be Dr. Christopher Lamb. Christopher Lamb is the co-author of the recently released biography of George Horton, entitled The Gentle American, George Horton's Odyssey and his true account of the Smyrna catastrophe. Horton was an American consul general in Smyrna when it was burned by Turkish nationalists in 1922. And he later wrote about the Turkish genocide of Anatolian Christians in his famous book, The Blight of Asia. During almost 40 years of service in the Department of State and Department of Defense, Dr. Lamb has served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for War Plans and Resource Planning, Study Director for the Project on National Security Reform, Director of the Center for Strategic Research at the National Defense University, Deputy Director for the Interagency Task Force on Stabilization in the Balkans, Director of Policy Planning for the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict, and a Foreign Service Officer with tours in Haiti, Ivory Coast, and Benin. He is an award-winning author with numerous publications. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Lamb.
Well, Lou, thank you so much for having me.
And my apology, he will be speaking on an outsider perspective on Orchid Day. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. And that is indeed the title of my presentation this afternoon, An Outsider's Perspective. The reason I call it that is that I believe in celebrating Ohi Day, even though I'm not Greek. I'm not even Greek American. However, truth in advertising, I am married to an incredible Greek woman. And as some of you know, that makes a big difference in perspective. But just for the record, I do want to emphasize that I appreciated and admired the Greeks' devotion to liberty and their defiance of tyrants well before I met my wife, primarily because I had studied the classics. I think the attitude of freedom-loving aspect of the Greek people is admirably summarized by that ancient Greek poet Euripides, who reportedly said he would rather die on his feet than live on his knees. And that's something I imbibed as I studied the classics. But the point I want to make today is that I don't celebrate Ohi Day because of the ancient Greeks. I celebrate Ohi Day because of the modern Greeks, and not just because of what they did in 1940. I began celebrating Ohi Day actually while I was researching Greek history with the help of my wife as we prepared a biography on George Horton. As Lou just mentioned, we just published the biography, and I learned a great deal from that research. Lou mentioned George Horton was the American Consul General in Smyrna when it was sacked and burned in 1922 by the Turkish nationalists. He spent 30 years in Greece and in the Near East, including the Ottoman Empire. He spoke perfect Greek, had deep insights on the Hellenic spirit. Researching his life and seeing history from his vantage point really convinced me that the Greek devotion to liberty is something that must be celebrated. And I want to give you two examples of what I mean when I say that. And I suspect that both may be surprising to you, or to at least some of the members of our audience. The first example is how World War I ended. I've read dozens of books on World War I, but I have to confess I never had a true understanding of how the war actually ended until recently during this research on George Horton. Most people, especially in Britain and the United States, think that the war ended on the Western Front when an exhausted Germany just gave up. That is not the case. Germany never collapsed on the Western Front. And Kosa, if you could please put up the first of my three illustrations. Thank you. Yeah, this map illustrates how World War I really ended. An Allied offensive was launched from Greece. Mm-hmm. It was only possible because the Greeks provided 9 fresh divisions, the largest portion of the attacking Allied forces. The effort was a great success. They broke through the Bulgarian defenses, and more remarkably, they drove 400 miles in less than 8 weeks, knocking Germany's allies out of the war. First, Bulgaria surrendered, and then the Ottoman Empire surrendered, and then the Austro-Hungarian Empire surrendered because of this unprecedented rout of the Central Powers forces. And that, in fact, is what forced Germany to sue for peace. Listening to me, someone might think or say to themselves, well, the Greeks entered the war late, and that is true. The Greeks wanted to remain neutral, resisting bullying from both sides until 1917. But the point is, in the end, the Greeks sided with the democracies against the authoritarian Central Powers. And if they had not done so, the stalemated war would have groaned on and modern history would be very different, you can be sure. You know, here in the United States, we celebrate November 11th as now as Veterans Day, but it used to be, originally it was called Armistice Day, and it celebrated the end of the horrific First World War where millions and millions died, about 20 million. Yet very few Americans, even very well educated Americans, know how World War I ended or the critical role that Greece played in that outcome. And a second example I'd like to bring up may also surprise some people. And here I want to refer to the Greek peace enforcement operations in Asia Minor that followed World War I. Thank you, Costas, for the second illustration there. Many people, even Greeks, avoid talking about this terrible disaster, and it is altogether a humongous catastrophe. But I view the Greek experience and involvement in this portion of the Near East history differently than many people for reasons I want to explain. The maps on the chart that Costas put up there demonstrate that the Greeks only operated in the far east of Anatolia. They were limited by the other allies in that regard. And yet they had great success in Thrace, Ionia, and near Constantinople. The Greek forces repeatedly defeated Kemal's nationalist forces, and that was true until late in 1921. Now, there are many misconceptions about this period of history, and as I discovered in researching the Horton biography with my wife, and I just want to mention a few because they will help me make a point about why we need to celebrate Ohi Day. The first thing I want to mention is that it's important to understand that this fighting in Anatolia was not a Greco-Turkish war, as so many people refer to it. It was a continuation of World War I, as George Horton argued. The Allies, including the Greeks, were there in Asia Minor to enforce the peace terms that Ottoman authorities signed and agreed to, first in the Mudros Armistice and later in the Treaty of Sèvres. In other words, Greek forces went to Smyrna in 1919 for the Allies for the very same reason that Allied forces were occupying Germany and other Central Power territory. Similarly, and contrary to popular opinion, the Greek arrival in Smyrna did not ignite Turkish resistance, as again, so many historians mistakenly assert. Turkish nationalists had been resisting the peace terms of the Mudros Armistice from the moment it was signed. They hid weapons, they refused to return stolen property, they refused to return abducted women and children, and they, most importantly, they kept attacking the Ottoman Christian neighbors that they had. This kind of resistance was on display, in fact, in Smyrna when the Greeks arrived, where the Turks laid a carefully premeditated ambush for Allied troops. And after initiating this violence, the Turks lied about it in their propaganda to raise popular support for their cause. Finally, let me address the whole question of the Megali idea, the notion that the Greeks wanted to acquire portions of Thrace and Ionia. My response would be, of course, most victors in war expect compensation. That's what the wars are about, contested issues like that. And many Greeks lived in those areas. But it's also a fact that the Greek authorities were greatly concerned with safeguarding the Christian lives that had been terrorized for almost 30 years, and that included in 1913 before World War I even started. Now, these goals were complementary, of course, because it was the Greek presence that assured the safety of the Christian minorities. But here is the main point. The Greeks have nothing to be ashamed of when it comes to their history in Asia Minor. Quite the contrary. Only the Greeks were willing to step forward to enforce the World War I peace terms. and to protect the Ottoman Christians who were the victims of an ongoing genocide. And they did so against overwhelming odds, and I think that deserves to be celebrated. Most histories treat Kemal's victory as if it was foreordained. I really believe they are wrong. That's not what the history shows. The Greek forces, all alone and without any assistance from other allies, came within a hair's breadth of prevailing. In a 3-day seesaw battle at Sakarya in front of Kemal's capital, Greek forces fought uphill against entrenched Turkish positions until they ran out of ammunition and had to fall back. In other words, they were successful until they literally ran out of resources, which I might add was something that Horton predicted would happen if the Allies didn't support the Greeks. So, in conclusion, it was not the Greeks that failed in Asia Minor. It was the Allies who sacrificed the Asia Minor Christians to the genocidal Turkish nationalists. It was the Italians, the French, and the Russians who switched sides and supported Kemal with money, weapons, and training. And to a lesser extent, it was the British and the Americans who gave the Greeks no assistance whatsoever, even though they were enforcing the terms that the British and the Americans and the French had negotiated. So from my point of view, it is the Allies that have something to be ashamed of. They betrayed their ally Greece. They betrayed the principles they said they fought for in World War I, and they betrayed the millions of Christians in Asia Minor who suffered because of it. Horton makes this argument in his book, The Blight of Asia, which Lou mentioned to you at the outset. And our biography demonstrates that Horton's scholarship was correct, and modern scholarship backs him up on the arguments he made. By the way, Horton also argued the Greeks had other reasons to be proud of their record in Asia Minor. The Greeks demonstrated their magnanimity, which some might call philotimo, in two ways. First, they accepted all the destitute refugees pouring into Greece that no other country would take. Esther Lovejoy, an American missionary who, like George Horton, helped the Smyrna refugees, made this observation. She said, quote, "The golden age of Greece in art and literature was over 2,000 years ago, but the golden age of Greece, measured by the golden rule, is during the present." Horton thought there was another aspect of Greek behavior that was also remarkable during this period. He wrote, and I quote, "The conduct of the Turks towards the thousands of Turks, the conduct of the Greeks towards the thousands of Turks residing in Greece while the ferocious massacres were going on, and while Smyrna was being burned and refugees, wounded, outraged, and ruined, were pouring into every port of Hellas, was one of the most inspiring and beautiful chapters in all that country's history. There were no reprisals. The Turks living in Greece were in no way molested, nor did any storm of hatred or revenge burst upon their heads. This," George Horton said, "is a great and beautiful victory that in its own way rises to the level of Marathon and Salamis." And that kind of brings us to the ferocious Greek defense of liberty in World War II that General Leontaris and Dr. Bowman were describing for the audience earlier. And it's, of course, the primary reason people celebrate Ohi Day. Costas, could you please put up my last illustration? Thank you. Here you see a side-by-side comparison of Greek defense and defiance in 480 BC and in 1940. Many know how Spartan King Leonidas responded when the Persian king told the Spartans to lay down their weapons at Thermopylae. "Molan lave," he said, "come and get them." 2,420 years later, the Greek prime minister gave an equally pithy response when the Italians demanded that they lay down their weapons and give up freedom without a fight. The heroic Greek defiance in 1940 surprised the world, and their success even more so. Only a few years previously, newspapers in the United States and in Europe, ignorant about what really happened in Asia Minor, mocked Greeks as the world's worst soldiers. But to everyone's amazement, in 1940, the Greeks threw back an Italian invasion and made life so difficult for the Germans that the world's leaders, and even Hitler, voiced unstinting admiration for the Greek fighting spirit. Obviously, it wasn't the Greeks who changed. It was the world's appreciation of the Greeks that changed. Horton believed the modern Greeks were worthy of their ancestors, and researching his life has taught me that he was right, and not just because of what the Greeks did in 1940. My fellow panelists have explained well the Greek defiance in 1940 and what the Greeks sacrificed, but I would like to just emphasize what President Roosevelt said at the time. He mentioned the Greeks, saying that they, quote, were given 3 hours in which to decide whether to accept acts of slavery or to resist. And then he added, quote, if they had been given 3 years, their choice would have been the same. Today, Greece is a land of desolation, but the Greeks are fighting on. They will never be defeated. Roosevelt's comments perfectly frame the spirit of liberty that the Greeks have bequeathed to the world time and again at critical junctures in history, not just in ancient times, but again and again in modern history. In all these cases, it did not matter whether the Greek fighting forces won or lost, or even whether they survived. What mattered in those cases, all of them, and still matters today, is that the Greeks showed the world their determination to live free or not at all. That burning spirit of liberty is alive in Greek women as well as men, and even in Greek children. I think of the Greek Boy Scouts of Aden, just southeast of Smyrna, who gave their lives rather than live on their knees, and the Greek women from Suli and Epirus who danced off a cliff rather than give themselves to the Ottomans. They represent the same unquenchable spirit of defiance against tyrants that Spartan warriors exhibited at Thermopylae and that the Greek soldiers who rushed to the Italian front in 1940 displayed. In sum, Greeks, in my estimation, have proven time and again that they have a spirit, a burning spirit of liberty, and it is something that deserves to be celebrated. That concludes my comments, and thank you for your time and attention.
Chris, thank you for that. And I really enjoy when you discuss actually what took place, during the so-called Greco-Turkish war that was not such. Okay, and I think that's fascinating, and it's something that I think we have to constantly repeat. Also, in terms of the 3 hours that Roosevelt talked about, as we know, 2.5 hours into the 3 hours, actually, the Italian forces started to invade. They didn't even wait for the third hour, quite frankly, to attack. Thank you, and you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct, and it's in that spirit, quite frankly, that they fought that goes back for a few thousand years. Thank you for that, Chris. Our next presenter is Alexander Billinis. Alexander is a lecturer in the Honors College and Political Science Department at Clemson University, where he also coordinates the Honors College's Dixon Fellows Program, designed to provide honors students with intellectual extracurricular programs. He is also a master's degree candidate in Clemson University's Department of History, where his thesis focuses on the Hellenic merchant marines. He has also worked as a lawyer and as a real estate investor, as well as an international banker, where he worked in the United States, Greece, and the UK. He earned a law degree from the American University at Washington College of Law, and an undergraduate degree from Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. He has lived in the United States, Greece, Serbia, the UK, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Chile, and has published 2 books, as well as being a prolific writer in various publications. He is also a director of EMBCA, and he is married with 2 children that we always see pictures of, and lives in Clemson, South Carolina. Thank you, Alexander, for joining us. Alexander will be speaking on OXI Day and the Hellenic Merchant Marines and the Hellenic fleets. Thank you, Alexander, for joining us.
Well, as always, thank you, Lou. It's an honor to be part of EMBCA, part of this panel, distinguished scholars and members of the Hellenic military. It's great to be here. I'm glad that I'm after Dr. Lamb's presentation, because what Dr. Lamb is doing, along with the other Dr. Lamb Izmini, who I've had the pleasure of meeting and teaches at my alma mater, is you're working on a real narrative. I don't want to even say an alternative narrative, but because it's the actual narrative. And part of what I'm going to seek to do today is briefly discuss another narrative that's not been denied, but I would suggest has been obscured, because Greeks saying OXI to the Axis powers, while it officially began on October 28, at sea, it began in 1939. So if Costa would kindly put up my presentation, we'll do a walkthrough of the presentation. So my argument here, and this does go into my thesis at some length, is that Greek merchant mariners in World War II said OXI before OXI Day. Now, this particular ship, the Halcyon, from Panamanian registered but Greek owned, will be important as we go through our slides. So if you can go to the next slide, Costa, thank you. Well, in 1939, at the start of World War II, the Greek merchant marine was the world's 9th largest. Greek shipping was a key component of the Greek economy and of global transport, and it was very much tied to the Pax Britannica. So I'm reminded of General Leontaris' point about the importance of the Greek-British alliance. Well, particularly the merchant marine was a key part of that. Greek shipping in its form in 1939 and currently is a late Ottoman era phenomenon. I have argued that the genesis of the Greek merchant fleet really came from the island of Hydra, whose flag is behind me. I'm a proud Hydriot. One is always a Hydriot. And the picture I have is of the Hydriot brig Ares, which both served in commerce and in wartime. Like American ships in our American War of Independence, they served dual purposes. But Greek shipping is very much a global phenomenon, very much a homeland and diaspora phenomenon. So by 1939, it was the 9th largest merchant fleet in the world and was heavily involved in world commerce. So in the start of the war began, as we know, in 1939, as General Leontaris walked us through, with the Anglo-French declaration of war following Germany's attack of Poland in September 1939. And even though Greece was neutral, her ships were not, and they played a vital role in keeping the British Isles supplied from the very beginning of the war. And they were active German targets from September 1939. The Germans did not care about Greece's neutrality, and they actively picked off Greek ships. So in the last 3 months of 1939, 5 Greek ships went down. According to my figures, there were at that point no Greeks who had died for OXI at sea as yet. However, by the time that Greece did officially join the war, dozens of ships had been lost and over 100 Greek sailors had lost their lives. So these were the first casualties of OXI. Also brought up by General Leontaris, we should of course remember the sailors of the cruiser Eli, who died in the cowardly Italian submarine attack in August of 1940. So there were already Greeks at the bottom of the Mediterranean and the Atlantic who fought for the freedom of everyone and kept the supplies that were absolutely necessary to the successful prosecution of the war. Next slide, please. So Greece says no, and I think I have the same picture, although not colorized, as General Leontaris of the Greek military fighting in Albania. Well, while this was going on, of course, the Greek merchant marine was fighting on all fronts, obviously the Atlantic, where Greek ships, which tended to be older, were being picked off by U-boat wolf packs. The Italians' submarine fleet actively engaged against the Greek fleet, both in the Atlantic and particularly in the Mediterranean. And then, of course, when the Germans finally brought the blitzkrieg to Greece's shores with the invasion via Bulgaria, the German air fleets took a terrible toll on the Greek merchant fleet in Greek and Mediterranean waters. It's important to remember, though, that even though Greek ships primarily met their end in the Mediterranean and in the Atlantic, Greek ships were bringing supplies globally, and they were being picked off also in the Indian and Pacific Oceans by Germany's ally, Japan. So the Greek merchant marine fought a global war on behalf of the Allies. Next slide, please. So as part of my master's thesis, I put together an interactive map where I mapped every Greek ship that was sunk during the course of World War II. In my actual story map, this is a live map where you can focus in on, but as you can see, there's a plethora of crosses in the North Atlantic, all along the coast of Africa and the Mediterranean. You go to the next slide, please, Costas. So what do the numbers tell us? Well, aside from all the ships that went down, in 1939, there were 404 Greek ships over 2,000 tons. By 1945, there were 150 left. There were 2,000 Greek merchant mariners who were killed. These statistics, even though they seem small in numbers, when you take the total number of Greek merchant mariners, these are very high casualty rates. Now, I wasn't able to find Greek numbers, but I know that for the American merchant marine, the death rate in battle was second only to the death rate of the American Marines, who we should remember in World War II were attacking primarily in the Pacific against suicidal Japanese defenders. So in terms of American deaths, the highest deaths after the US Marines were merchant ships. So this was a massive, this was a bloody killing field where the merchant mariners were basically defenseless. In terms of Allied tonnage lost, the Greek ships ranked 5th. In terms of years, the worst year for the Greek losses was 1941, and that's particularly because Greece was invaded. But in 1942, there were hundreds of losses and thousands of deaths, particularly near the US Atlantic coast. Now let's go to a personal story. This is my paternal grandfather, Alexander Billinis. This is a copy of the last letter that he wrote to my grandmother in Piraeus, dated just before the invasion of France. That was the last time my father or his family had heard from him. And that ship that I posted at the front of my presentation was his ship, which on the 6th of, if you can go to the next slide, Costa. On the 6th of February in 1942, just a few months after the entrance of Greece, excuse me, of the United States into World War II, was shelled by a U-boat that surfaced on this isolated ship. And there were 3 fatalities. Among them was my grandfather. As this slide indicates, I've shown statistics on each and every ship that went down, and where available also the fatalities. You'll also note that this was not too far from the US Atlantic coast. It's not too far actually from the South Carolina coast. And it also shows the vulnerability of Allied shipping to the U-boats at that time. Next slide, please. Well, a military of the rank of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel said that supplies are the basis of the battle. So basically, if you did not have shipping, you would not have had victory in World War II. Britain would have been unable to sustain itself, and there would have been no way for the industrial and military might of the United States to be brought into play against Germany and Japan. So without ships, there is no victory. And I think it's very important and often forgotten as we celebrate the glorious victories of the Greek army, which we should. And even though I'm an islander, I'm a veteran of the Greek military rather than the Navy. So I'm very proud of the Greek army. I think it's very important that we talk about the role of Greece at sea, because Greece once again played an outside role and paid for it with the blood of her sons. And yet, like the Phoenix, Greek shipping arose from the ashes of the Battle of the Atlantic. And here, as an American, I'm also very proud that American industrial might and enlightened self-interest met with the Greek shipping genius. And Lou and I have talked about this in other panels, what we call the Blessed Liberty ships. So if we go to the next slide. Here on the left, you see the the actual assembly line construction of Liberty ships, which in some cases would be completed within a month. Actually, the fastest built Liberty ship was done in 5 days and was in operation until 1965. To the right, you see the Hellas Liberty ship, which EMBCA hosted a conference on the ship, which is one of 2 surviving Liberty ships and is a museum. Well, the story of the Liberty ships is pretty well known, but just to give a quick overview of the Liberty ships, in response to the horrific destruction of shipping by the U-boats, the United States ingenuity and industrial might built a crash program of ships at the same time as the Battle of the Atlantic started to turn decisively in favor of the Allies. So even before the war was over, the US government was looking for a logical and profitable way to offload this excess industrial capacity. And luckily, the US found very synchronous opportunity with connecting Liberty ships to Greek ship owners, to Greek sailors who were among the best in the world, along with other European sailors, the Norwegians, the Danes, even the Italians, and using these surplus ships, as my cousin, who is a retired Greek Navy, Greek merchant marine captain, said, it was the yeast upon which the Greek fleet rose again. So in the tragedy of the Battle of the Atlantic, where Greece lost so much of its tonnage was also set the stage for Greece to be not the 9th largest shipping country, but since 1970, the largest shipping power in the world. So just to go back to what Christopher was saying, as he's brought the true narrative of the Greek-Turkish War and World War I to light, I think that as part of the OXI narrative, we need to talk about the OXI that began before OXI and was at sea, because once again, you have Greeks playing a heroic outside role. Thank you very much.
Alexander, thank you for that. And people may not realize, but when the war broke out in Ilias with the fascist powers invading, and then the subsequent issues that you mentioned, there were a lot of Greek merchant marine ships in the water, and they obviously couldn't go back to Greece. Many of them actually came into the United States of America. And when they came into the United States of America, many of the people who were on those ships actually joined the American forces, and actually served in World War II, fighting for America. And that's not brought up a lot also. And then when they started to produce the Liberty ships, among the people that got Liberty ships and that's during the war, that got Liberty ships were in fact ship owners that were Greek. And one of the ships, one of the first ships that came out, Liberty ships, was actually called the Ilias. And we know later that another ship was named the Ilias that is now a museum.
Yep.
And again, many people don't realize this, but a lot of the large shipping companies actually were based in New York, and it all related to what happened in World War II. And then, as you stated, because of the losses, because of the support of the Greek merchant marines and the shippers, that a lot of the Liberty ships were actually sold to Hellenic shipping owners. And there was about 103 Liberty ships that were actually bought, and America actually had reduced the price for the Greeks on the basis of their support during the war. Thank you for that. Do you have the interactive link, Alexander, that you can just mention before I go to the next presenter?
I will have to send it. I'll send it to Costa because it's a long link. But yeah, I'll do that while Peter's talking.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alexander. Our next presenter is Peter Giakoumis. Peter is an author, historical consultant, and his subject matter, an expert really regarding the Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913. He is the director and founder of the Greek-American 1912 Project, a former adjunct instructor to the Field Academy with the Department of Homeland Security for 18 years. He holds a master's degree in international relations and is currently the curator of the Heritage Museum of Ilias in Astoria, New York. Welcome, Peter, and thank you for being on board today. Peter, are you there? Did we lose Peter? Is Peter
He's not online right now. He's not online. He's not online right now.
Okay, you know what? While we're waiting for Peter to come online, and please interrupt when he is online. Ilya, I had stopped you when you were going to ask a question. So if you can, please ask it.
Well, in fact, it's not a question. It's let's say, as Dr. Bowman was referring to the statue of Phrysis, and I found this the statue, let's say, and I can let me. Okay, no, I cannot do it right now, but I will do it later. But as Mr. Billinis referred to, let's say, to the I will make it, and I will come back with the picture of the statue. But coming to what Mr. Billinis said, yeah, it is obvious that Metaxas did the right choice when he chose to join, let's say, the United Kingdom. And he wrote just after the unjust attack of Italy, the policy I follow, he said, is the policy of the late Venizelos, because it is the policy of coordinating Greece with the fate of the power for which the sea has always been as it is for Greece, not the obstacle that separates, but the wet avenue that unites. So, and this one happens also in 1821 during the let's say the Greek liberation anyway. So made the right choice, and okay, nothing to do with what his ideology was, but his first ideology was Greece. And just one more comment until the next speaker comes. Yeah, the title is the No to Fascists. I can tell you that in 1940, many of those Greek soldiers did not know or had even not heard about the word fascists, and they did not know what fascist is about, but they knew that someone attacks their country, and that let's say it is against the liberty and the freedom, and this is how they responded to that threat anyway. So of course now we are, let's say, from the luxury of our living rooms, we can discuss about this in a different way. But these soldiers left families behind, left their properties behind, and when they came back, it was a different country anyway, under occupation by these three forces. So thank you for allowing me to.
No, thank you, Ilya. We might as well continue our open discussion right now. Anyone can ask any question.
I just found the statue, if it comes through.
Oh, yeah, we got it. Okay.
Oh, you got it?
Yeah. No, it's great. It's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. So Peter is having connection difficulties. So why don't we just start an open discussion? Anybody can ask any questions that they want or make any comments that they want. And then we can finalize this program, which has been fascinating, by the way. But a couple of the words that struck in my mind as you were speaking was one of them, just a few words. For example, Ilya mentioned the word of violating airspace. And when you hear violating airspace, I mean, you just think of what's happening today in terms of violation of airspace, thousands of times, and it quite frankly sticks. The other word that hit me, quite frankly, with the violating of airspace, had to do with the word betrayal that was used by Christopher Lamb, which I thought again was a fascinating thing to say. I'll open the discussion. Obviously, we talked about history, and certainly Chris mentioned historical perspectives going back to the ancient times and how the Hellenic people have resisted. Certainly, Ilya discussed the prelude to OXI Day. But here we are now, and a lot of the maybe different countries, but a lot of the circumstances that we've discussed in the past are resurfacing. Would anyone like to just discuss that in brief, or you don't have to go into any details, but just thoughts on that particular concept? Anyone?
So, if we can start, I will show this book. I don't know if we have ever seen this one.
Yes,
Giannis.
we have. Yes, Giannis. Yeah, of
Giannis.
course.
Okay, this is one of these fighters of the Greek Americans, and it's a story that it is not well known, and it is not well known because the whole mission was secret, and when this unit was deactivated, they had an order not even to talk to their families for where they were, and they kept it. And under the auspices of Ambassador Malias back in 2007, we organized an event, and we found some close to 20 people of those fighters, and we gathered them in the embassy in Washington, and the Hellenic National Defense General Staff awarded them with, let's say, a plaque for their services. And even for me, as an officer of the army, did not know that story. And what happened was in a social event in Washington, someone was sitting next to me. He saw me in my uniform and he said, are you, let's say, special forces or whatever? And he was a Greek American. I can tell his name. And suddenly in the screen appeared a video related with these Greek Americans. It was a video which was prepared by Jim Marketos, who was in Achi and passed away a few months ago. I told him that I'm looking for these guys. Can you support me? And his name is Lou Iliopoulos, and he supported me, and we found these fighters, and we awarded them with, let's say, the plaque. And there is a statue also in the military park in Athens related to these Greek Americans participating in the resistance. As it concerns the Greek forces in Asia Minor, many people, and in some cases, not only common people, believe that the Greek forces went to Asia Minor by an amphibious operation. They did not know that it was under a mandate that was given by, let's say, the Allied forces, the winners of the World War I. And they thought that we started the war. We did not start it, as the professor said, Dr. Christopher Lab said, we did not start any war. We went there, and this one was the first peacekeeping operation for the Greek army. And then followed many others, like in Somalia, in Afghanistan, in Bosnia, and Kosovo, etc., etc. But they started as a peacekeeping operation. Of course, let's say, the behavior of the Allies and the political decisions in Athens, and all these changes which happened since 1999 until 2022 brought these results anyway. And of course, one of the reasons is the behavior of the Allies, but there were many others, let's say, related with the Greek, let's say, side. And in addition to that, just to remind you that since the end of the World War I, the Prime Minister of Greece, Venizelos, until November 20, was abroad. The Prime Minister was not in Athens. He was between Paris and London in order to negotiate let's say, the final agreement, and in order to see how Greece can get more from, let's say, since it has been in the side of the winners. But back in Athens, his let's say, his replacement did not do so well.
I will say, Leah, that I do have a copy of the book Yanni, just so you know. And I will say that there's actually a few hundred copies that are in New York right now. That maybe we should do an event. Maybe we should do an event.
You know,
actually go into details. To actually go into details about
you know,
what actually happened. Yeah,
I have got from Steve Statharos some hundreds of these books.
Oh, you got him too? Okay.
I have delivered them in many Greek officers here in Greece.
No, that's actually fantastic. But going back to what you mentioned earlier and what I said earlier about the 122nd Division, like I said, Vournas, did bring in a lot of these recruits, including the one that took over the 122nd Division. Which was actually the first Hellenic American who graduated from West Point, but he was also a son of Pericles member. You should also, I hate to talk about a HEPA, but Roosevelt was actually a member of my chapter, chapter 25 in New York, And one of the chapter presidents in the past was actually the head. And as a matter of fact, Roosevelt made him the head of all the Balkans, spy agency, quite frankly, around the Balkans during World War II. Alexander, your face was, you were going to say something, but you sort of stopped, and nobody bit when I said violating airspace. So, Alexander, any comments about violating airspace in more modern times?
Well, clearly, I think that a prelude to conflict is often a hybrid warfare situation, provocations, trying to create pretexts. Certainly, that was going on in the period before the attack via Albania. And given that there are clear parallels, I have an uncomfortable sense of deja vu when I look at what's going on today. That's number one. But as the conversation continued, and again to General Leontaris' point about the role of this Greek-American unit, I think it's important to note, and certainly Peter has done this. The diaspora has always come to the aid of the motherland. I mean, that's in terms of financial, in terms of enlistment. I mean, his book highlights the 40-odd thousand Greeks in America who went back. My other grandfather was one of them. Obviously,
during the Balkan Wars, you're talking about.
Yes, in the Balkan Wars, thousands of Greeks from Egypt, even Greeks from the Ottoman Empire would slip across and join the Greek colors and then go back. So the diaspora has always been heavily engaged, and I think that it's incumbent on us to continue engaging. But I think it's also incumbent on the Greek state to understand how to leverage the asymmetric power of the diaspora. Clearly, that was happening in the 1940s and before by a much smaller, less empowered, less financially strong diaspora. And I think that I don't have that sense of deja vu today. And I do worry about that. I don't think that there are the avenues of engagement, either the diaspora talking to each other or the engagement inward with the Greek motherland. And I think that, there's too many cases of success. I'll go back to a naval example. Part of the reason that the Balkan Wars were won, and even the Bulgarian General Slavov said this, is because the Greek Navy was there to prohibit Macedonia and Thrace being supplied. And what was the flagship of the Greek fleet? The Averov, which was built by a subscription of the cotton merchant Averov, but also other Greeks, primarily in Egypt, who contributed to its construction. So the diaspora has this asymmetric role, and that also needs to be discussed. Perhaps that's another. That's another
panel discussion.
You know how we are. We can start.
Yeah. We can go into tangents, which is all great, by the way. Stephen, you were very kind when you talked about the Jewish cemetery in Thessaloniki, because I was in Thessaloniki actually about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I did go to the Jewish Museum. And we did see the outlines of the Jewish cemetery, and again, you were kind, because a lot of the territory, property, etc. of the cemetery has been destroyed and taken over by others, and in some ways trying to be erased in certain degrees. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, this was not the point to.
No, I know, but I prefer to
empty the vial. There have been a number of things written about it, and actually the Germans could really have cared less about this, but they were pressured by the engineers in the Greek community leadership that wanted that land, they'd wanted it since 1904, actually,
Yeah.
or at least because the Ottomans, if you remember, had built the first building on part of the land,
Right.
and then they just wanted to keep expanding that and put the community under tremendous pressure in the 20s during the Hellenization period and in the 1930s. And then when the Germans took over and started putting pressure on the Jewish community by taking thousands of men out to die building railroads and fighting swamps and mosquitoes and other things of that nature, which was the result of the 9,000 Jewish men that they called on the Black Sabbath in 1943, July 12th, I think it was 1943. So the wives and mothers of these men attacked the Jewish community and said, "Bring our sons and husbands back." So they put tremendous pressure on them. And then finally, the negotiations began between the president and the Yom Tov Yokoel, who was the community lawyer, to negotiate bringing these men back. And then with the pressure from the Greek authorities, German put forth that they would first they asked for 3 billion drachmas, and the Jews couldn't raise that money. And then they negotiated the price down to 2 billion, and then they had to throw in sell the graveyard.
Mm.
And then immediately Greek engineers poured in there along with the local community, and they took all the stones. I mean, there were probably 500,000 graves over 500 years, and some of them running back into the Byzantine period. So they took all these stones, and then the Germans used them to build, and people used them to rebuild their houses and put in walkways and things of that nature. I remember the American Farm School had a pathway made up of broken stones. And then in the Ilias Leontaris, the big church in Salonika, the stones were piled up, 20 feet high, that they took for repairs. And,
very interesting. I think we're going to wrap it up. This has been a fascinating discussion. We're just going to have some final words from everyone. We'll start with Ilias Leontaris. Ilias, final thoughts.
Yeah, I would like to come back and to close with, as it was in my last station, my last step in my career with Cyprus. And in Cyprus, after Greece entered the war, crowds of people came to the roads and in the streets with enthusiasm. And the Greek Cypriots unfolded the Greek flags, which was forbidden since 1931, when they had the first attempt to get the independence. So they had several fundraisers in the churches and in other areas. They collected a big amount of money and sent it to Greece to support the let's say the preparation of the armed forces. The British took advantage of this behavior of the Greek Cypriots, and they called them to join the British army, telling them that if you join the British army and fight with us, it is like to fight for Greece. And it happened. So they formed the Cypriot regiment. And with that unit, they deployed to Macedonia, and they fought against the Germans, but in supportive role, kind of logistic, role. But as I said before, there were students and others who found themselves in the Greek territory, and they joined the Greek forces, and there was a big number of volunteers on that. So that to express my my love for this big island, and since I served there for 3 years and solution did not come, I feel myself part of the problem.
You're not part of the problem at all. Professor Bowman, some final thoughts?
Well, I think it should be reminded that Greeks and Jews have been around for 3,500 years. They lived together, they fought each other, they intermarried, they lived in each other's country.
Sir, you know that there is a Jewish camp in Cyprus as well.
Oh yes, of course. I met some people that when I was there, and they created two streams of Western civilization.
What's fascinating to me is that the Hellenic Jews, as a matter of fact, you know that also Catherine Fleming also wrote a book relating actually to the Jews, the Greek Jews that were actually in the concentration camps and how they were different. There's no doubt that the Hellenic Jews are part of Hellenism, period. There is no doubt about that at all.
Absolutely.
And among the finest Hellenes in the world. There's no doubt about that at all. Dr. Lamb, some final thoughts?
Since 1492.
I'm sorry, Ilya?
The Jews are in Thessaloniki in other areas since 1492.
Yes,
Well,
but they've been
actually,
in the last,
some of them were there early in the late
years.
14th century. But the Greek-speaking Jews were there since
Thousands of years.
He was founded.
Antiquity, yeah.
Thousands of years. Dr. Lamb, final thoughts?
Just two quick comments. One is how much I appreciated participating today. I learned something new from every presentation, which were very diverse and illuminating. So I want to thank my co-panelists for their excellent presentations. The second thing is, I hope someday, Lou, you'll do a seminar or a symposium on Greek education, because it was very startling to me to research Horton's life and see Greece through his eyes. I learned a lot about history that I did not know. But one of the most shocking things that my wife Ismini and I encountered when we were visiting Athens to do research, we visited Thessaloniki to do research. She even went to Izmir, used to be Smyrna, of course. One of the most shocking things was to discover how many Greeks don't know their own history. It's as if you would think there was one place in the world where people would appreciate these truths about Greek history, it would be in Greece. And yet we had people would ask us what we were doing, and we would tell them, and they would say, oh, well, that didn't happen, or that's not right, is it? You know, we were really shocked. We were shocked by that. And there's been some excellent research done in recent decades by Greeks and non-Greeks on this period of history. And I think of a couple of PhD dissertations by absolutely superlative research done by Greeks, actually Greeks getting their doctorates in the UK, that weren't published, that are not published in Greece. And Solomonides' work on the Greek administration in Ionia, and Deliazu's dissertation on the British and what they were up to in the interwar years. These are terribly important and critical pieces of research that nobody published. I'm kind of shocked by the state of education in my own country here in the United States, but also in Greece. Maybe that's a subject for another day.
No, I think it's an important subject, and I think we're going to take you up on that. As a matter of fact, we're going to have that discussion and see if we can put a panel discussion with regards to that. One thing that shocks me, by the way, is that, you know, many times people talk about history, etc. And what shocks me is that in the diaspora, in the Hellenic diaspora, and Alexander would know this because we have done a lot of panel discussions on different topics. We find that in the diaspora, we know more about the Hellenic history than they do in many cases, in most cases, in Hellas itself. It's like a shocking thing. And part of the reason why we do a lot of these panel discussions is actually to bring the history of Hellas back to the Hellenes, okay? And it's kind of important. Some of the research that you have done with Ismini is groundbreaking. It's not only groundbreaking regarding Hellenic history, but it's groundbreaking regarding international history, because some of the things that you even discussed today, very few people know about at all, period, zero, full stop. And it's very important that we continue that type of dialogue. Alexander, some final thoughts, words?
Yes, I think that I think you encompassed most of it, Lou, but I think that, and again, this goes back to Christopher's point, there are narratives that need to be told. And what he's talking about, the Greek-Turkish War is really a continuation of the First World War, is absolutely vital, and nobody ever expressed it so simply. So as he was saying, how he's learned from others, that has to be, if I had to say, the number one standout. Simply framing this discussion differently is absolutely vital. But I also think it's very important, because we rightly talk about the outsized role of Greece in the land war in Europe in World War II. We have got to remember that the economic war, the war at sea, because without that, there would be no victory, and Greece played a role far beyond its size. So that's what I'd leave with. And thank you again.
No, thank you, Alexander. One of the questions that I asked that no one wanted to really touch, or they diverted, had to do with obviously incursions, and it had to do obviously with betrayal. But we'll discuss that in a separate panel discussion when we talk about the geopolitics of the Eastern Mediterranean. Costa, are you with us, Costa?
I'm here.
Okay, my friend, sing us another Vembo song to end this fantastic discussion that we've been having.
Γλέντι έχουν πόλεις και χωριά, απ' τη Ρουμελή ως τα Μοριά, πηδούνε και χορεύουν, τον Μπενίτο κοροϊδεύουν, ο στρατός μας πάνω στα βουνά, για τη ελευθερία μας ξαγρυπνά, με το πλοία φλογέρα τραγουδάει νύχτα μέρα. Πατρίδα, πατρίδα, Ελλάδα δοξασμένη, κανείς δεν θα σ' αγγίξει τη γη τη τιμημένη. Πατρίδα, πατρίδα, όλα τα παιδιά σου στα σύνορα πεθαίνουν για την ελευθεριά σου. Καλύτερα μιας ώρας ελεύθερη ζωή, παρά 40 χρόνια σκλαβιά και φυλακή. Νύχτη ντυμένη αστρολαμπερό, με τον τσολιά της πλάι για γαμπρό. Γελάει ευτυχισμένη η Ελλάδα εδοξασμένη, δόξα με την νίκη να έρθουν, στην αγκαλιά της να αποκοιμηθούν. Απ' όλα τα παιδιά της γλυκοτράγωδουν μπροστά της. Πατρίδα, πατρίδα, Ελλάδα δοξασμένη, κανείς δεν θα σ' αγγίξει τη γη την τιμημένη. Πατρίδα, πατρίδα, όλα τα παιδιά σου στα σύνορα πεθαίνουν για την ελευθεριά σου. Καλύτερα μιας ώρας ελεύθερη ζωή, παρά 40 χρόνια σκλαβιά και φυλακή. Καλύτερα μιας ώρας ελεύθερη ζωή, παρά 40 χρόνια σκλαβιά και φυλακή.
Thank you so much. And to the audience, join us in 2 weeks when we have another panel discussion, this time on Hellenism in art from both sides of the pond. For those who want to find out about our programming, go to the internet on EMBCA.com and follow us on YouTube on the EMBCA YouTube channel. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to the fantastic panel and the discussion. We certainly will continue some of the things that we talked about further. Thank you all. Thank you for
Thank
being
you as
with us
well.
today. Thank you again.
Have a good
Thank
one.
you. Yeah, thank you from Greece. Thank you, Dr. Professor Bowman. Christopher, thank you so much. Give my regards to Ismini. Take care, Alexander, and we will
You're
chat
on.
soon, everyone. Thank you, Costa. Thank you for that fantastic singing. My hair stood up when you were singing. Thank you. Take care now. Thanks.